Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I would like to focus my attention in this short call in the budget debate on the issue of housing, which is indeed an issue which has dominated much of the coverage and debate of this year's budget. And I guess to start on a positive note, the government does deserve to be congratulated in the sense that it has finally cottoned on to the fact that we do have an affordable housing crisis in New Zealand. And I must say, Mr Speaker, it took them long enough. Now, as we know, this affordable housing crisis is absolutely worst in Auckland, where the average house price last year was $735,000. That is the average price to buy a new home in Auckland, and that increased 12% in the last calendar year alone. So any time you hear the Minister crowing about low interest rates and how affordable housing is, I would just remind you of that figure. And not only that, Mr Speaker, but in Auckland, it takes a staggering 71% of the average take-home pay to service the mortgage on a house that is priced in the first quartile, i.e. this house is one of the cheapest quarter of houses in Auckland, and it takes 71% of the average income to service the mortgage on that house. Now, when we talk about housing affordability, anything over 30% of your income spent on housing is considered to put you in housing stress and for that house to be severely unaffordable. And we have a situation in Auckland where it takes 71% of the average take-home pay to service the mortgage on one of the cheapest houses in the market. So that's your crisis for you, Mr Speaker, and it's a pretty severe one. We also know that in Auckland we need with the problem with supply and demand, right? And we need about 13,000 new buildings to be consented, new dwellings to be consented each year, and we've been averaging only about 3,000. So it's no surprise that we have a severe housing crisis in Auckland. It's worst in Auckland, but it is actually bad everywhere. That equivalent figure for the national average in New Zealand takes 49% of the average take-home income to service a lower quartile house, the mortgage on a lower quartile house. So again, remembering that 30%, anything over 30% is severely unaffordable, puts a household in housing stress. We've got a problem across the whole of the country, and in places like the Central Otago Lakes, Nelson and Marlborough, Wellington and Waikato, that problem is elevated above the national average. So we have a major problem. And what we've seen from the government in terms of solutions is the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Bill, which I look forward to beginning to hear the submissions on in the Select Committee tomorrow. Now, in recognition of the fact that the housing crisis is worst in Auckland, this bill is effectively giving effect to the housing accord that the government reached with Auckland Council earlier this year. And that might be all right if that was all that it did, because clearly they've spoken with the council in Auckland, they've identified the problem there, they believe they've identified a solution to it, and they've brought some legislation to the House to deal with it. Unfortunately, it doesn't just deal with the issue in Auckland, it actually applies to the whole country. And not only that, Mr Speaker, but Auckland Council itself, because they weren't consulted on the drafting of the legislation, once they saw it, actually found that there were inconsistencies between the legislation and the accord that they thought they had signed up to with the government. But there are serious problems with the model that are proposed in the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Bill. First of all, it's based on the idea that the development at Hobsonville Point is the answer to affordable housing in Auckland. And given that the so-called affordable houses at Hobsonville Point cost either just over $400,000 or $485,000, which is not affordable for most people, that's not a great model to base it on. There's also no guaranteed percentage of affordable homes guaranteed in the new special housing areas that are going to be created, and they override local democracy, because those other regions that I mentioned where housing affordability is also a problem had better watch out, because the government is coming to create special housing areas in their region whether they like it or not, because all the power is with the minister. And if they can't negotiate in accord with the minister, he can just put a special housing area in place, regardless of whether the local council actually agrees, and overriding both the RMA and the local democracy for that area. And remembering, Mr Speaker, at the end of all of that, there is absolutely no guarantee in that special housing area that a percentage of those houses that will be provided will actually be affordable possible for the New Zealanders who are in severe housing stress at the moment. So congratulations to the government for identifying a problem. A shame that none of the measures do anything at all to address it.
Jonathan Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to stand and speak on this debate on